it was literally the most perfect form of love that I had ever experienced in my life. And I was like, I gotta share this with everybody I can.
Welcome to episode number 52 of the First Responder Wellness Podcast. My name is Conrad Weaver. Thanks so much for joining us today. What is the most powerful force on earth? The answer, I believe, is love. Yes, that's what Adam Davis talks about on the podcast today. Adam is a former police officer who shares his incredible journey of overcoming childhood trauma, addiction, and suicidal thoughts to find healing and purpose. Adam has inspired lives around the globe with his powerful words. His books have not only topped bestseller lists, but have also transformed countless lives. His work in personal development, leadership, and first responder advocacy is a beacon of practical wisdom and heartfelt encouragement, inspiring his audience to live unconquered. And today, he's my guest right here on the First Responder Wellness Podcast. So stay tuned. Hey, if you enjoy this show, please subscribe if you haven't already, and invite your tribe to join in as well. We drop a new episode every single Wednesday, so share the link if you find this content helpful and informative. Thanks again for being here, and now here's my conversation with Adam Davis. Well, Adam, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. I'm so privileged to have you on the program today.
Well, thank you for having me, Conrad. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been too long.
It has been too long. You know, we talked recently and you said it was 2020 since we last had you.
It's been 4 years, man.
I couldn't believe it was that long. So, and I think at that time I was like doing these live events on, I think it was called First Responder Friday.
You were, yeah.
Yeah. And so we had you on the live and I was like, was that the last time I had Adam on the show? I guess it was. So
4 years ago. A lot has happened in 4 years.
Yes, a lot has happened in 4 years for sure. And we'll dive into that. But for those people who don't know who you are, tell us a little bit about your background. Who are you and what do you do?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm a former law enforcement officer and I left my career in 2015. I have gone on to write 9 books. I just signed the contract for number 10, and we have agreed in principle to number 11. I have literally been all across this country. Last year was the first year that in one calendar year, from January to December, I went from New York City and Times Square to LA, Seattle, down to deep South Alabama, all over, and a whole lot of places in between. And was on Good Morning America, Huckabee, a bunch of media last year. Primary focus is not a very attractive matter subject, but I talk openly about my experience with complex PTSD, with childhood trauma, sexual abuse as a child, as a teenager, getting married at 18. And then become an alcoholic, and the day I tried to ultimately end my life, and sort of why I'm doing what I'm doing here, you know, and that's to kind of give other people an idea and the reality that there's a better way, there's hope, and you don't have to be stuck with that stuff. And it's really a decision on how you're going to push through and find healing, ultimate healing through like mind, body, spirit, not just focusing on one area or the other. So I've written several books. I've been on a whole lot of media interviews. I've launched my own platform, my own brand, Live Unconquered. And I'm excited, man. My last book released April of 23. And it was raw. It was ugly. It's messy. In fact, there's a disclaimer in the front, front of the book. There's a warning label. But it is real. And talking about the things that we want to sugarcoat or we want to dodge or we want to hit on a surface level and move on, but it saves lives. And so I'm on a mission to have a positive impact in a meaningful, lasting way.
Well, I want to go more into your books, but I want to say congratulations on really stepping up your game, going from Good Morning America to the First Responder Wellness Podcast.
I love them all, brother. I love them all, man. I really appreciate. I don't take anything for granted. and I remember our conversation from more than 4 years ago, and I'm grateful for your support 4 years ago. In fact, that was shortly after my second book was released, Bulletproof Marriage, and we were on the heels of On Spiritual Combat releasing. And so, I'm grateful for it. We all reach different audiences, and my primary audience is first responders.
Sure.
And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity to spend some time with you today and hopefully share something that will be encouraging for your audience.
Right. So to really kind of connect with that audience, and especially in law enforcement, tell us just briefly about your law enforcement history. How did you get into law enforcement? What was the motivating factor for that?
Yeah. I had, my dad's owned a business for now, 44 years, 43, 44 years. And because of the nature of his work, he was around law enforcement officers quite a bit growing up, when I was growing up. And I say growing up, my late teens, early adult years. And I'll back up. Childhood trauma has an effect on us that a lot of times we don't understand, and it's not all the same. And so I came out of the gate with, at 18, really had no idea what my purpose was, what my identity was. I think that's most 18-year-olds though.
Yeah.
And so I was just trying to find fulfillment in different things. But in the back of my mind, I'd always looked up to these men that were in uniform, these men and women that I'd seen on different scenes when we roll up on. And my number one dream in high school was to be able to join the military. That's what I wanted to do right out of the gate. And I was permanently disqualified multiple times for multiple branches. And so that I had to bury that dream. And then I got into pest control. I did pest control, working for a commercial pest control company, doing restaurants and other commercial establishments. And long story short, it was not cutting it. Like there was just an emptiness. And I had my wife and our oldest son we had moved to Auburn for her to go to pharmacy school. This is a side note. This is part of the journey here. We had moved to Auburn, Alabama for her to go to pharmacy school. We had 2 children at the time. And I'm out working one day and she calls me in a panic. And she said, Addison, our oldest son, she said, Addison has eaten all of my birth control pills. And I said, oh no. I said, call 911. And so she called 911 and they put her in touch with Poison Control. And Poison Control said, it's not going to hurt him. He may feel a little nauseous, but it's not going to hurt him. They did not tell us how it was going to impact her, because about a month later, we found out we had our 3rd child on the way. And so we moved back home shortly after, and I was hired on as a service manager. And I was, late 20s, like 27, 28, something like that. And I was leading a team of 6 or 7 guys, and it was a small family-owned deal. And one of the guys kept showing up late all the time. And it was like, that's pet peeve. I can't stand it. And so I went to the owner and I'm like, look, this is the issue I got. And he said, well, what do you think we need to do? I said, we need to let him go because it's not good for everybody else to see he's doing it. Well, it was the owner's son. So I fired him. And then a few weeks later, they fired me and hired him back. And that just so happened, that was March 5th of 2009. So our oldest was turning 5. And so I had to go home on his birthday and tell my wife I didn't have a job. Well, she's pregnant with a baby due in May. She's having pregnancy complications. She's on bed rest or whatever it was called, and she couldn't work. And so we've got 2 children at home, a wife and a 3rd child on the way, and I'm unemployed. And I had a conversation with my pastor, who was a former Marine, and a very frank conversation. He said, who do you want to be? What do you want to be? And I said, I've always felt called a pastor. And he said, man, you're such a cop out. you got 2 kids at home, you got a third on the way, you got a wife that can't work right now, and you want to, like, who are you? Hmm. What do you want to be? And I said, I've always admired, like, giving some thought, I said, I've always admired a lot of these men that have been around my dad. They're law enforcement officers. They're men of character. They got solid families. Now, some of them drank like fish, but they were there when you needed them, man. They were good men. I mean, damn good men. Mm-hmm. And I said, I've always admired them, and that's what I want to be. I want to be like them. I want to emulate them. I want to be a law enforcement officer. So I won't say exactly what he said. But if you ever come to my live events, I tell the whole thing. And he said, well, you need to, I'm going to paraphrase this and clean it up. He was like, you need to get some courage and go be go be a cop. And so I did. In September that year, I raised my right hand and I started the journey in 2009. And I started off on night shift patrol, went to police academy in Mobile, Alabama. And started off on night shift patrol, went to day shift patrol, traffic homicide, was trained as a hostage negotiator through the FBI, and then criminal investigations, working primarily property crimes, burglaries, B&Es, things of that nature. But being on call, you kind of catch everything: rapes, robberies, murders, suicides, and everything else in between. And I became a criminal intelligence liaison, criminal intelligence analyst. And then at one point, I was over managing like 130 something sex offenders and making sure they stayed in compliance. And if they didn't, put them back in jail. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about how I got into law enforcement, why I got into law enforcement, and a very brief synopsis of what I did.
So what was the motivating thing for you to get out of law enforcement?
When I left, in fact, October 1st of 2024, October 1st of this year will be 9 years that I've been gone. Mm-hmm. And this is going to sound horrible, but I kind of got bored. Mm-hmm. I'd been in the vehicle pursuits. I'd been in the foot pursuits. I'd been in the fights. I had multiple live negotiations, one that lasted a week, a week-long negotiation with a little boy that was the hostage in a bunker. Never was in an officer-involved shooting, but I had a lot of fun. After the week-long deal, the boy was rescued, bad guy was eliminated. I sort of started spiraling and started, like, I was drinking socially before. I was still drinking heavy socially, but I wasn't drinking like I started to after that week-long deal. Mm-hmm. And I started really spiraling, and I was drinking pretty heavy most every night, and became very emotional, like very cynical, very cold, very hard, very numb and to different things. And I wasn't emotionally present for the people that mattered the most. And I had applied for different state and federal jobs, which most of them required a college degree. I was working on that at the time. I was working on my undergraduate degree, but I didn't have it. I didn't have the qualifications. I had the experience that they needed, minimum experience, but I didn't have the education. And nothing was working. I was ready to kind of go to a different level. And I had some aspirations and some dreams and ambitions that I wanted to do. And it was just like one door after another, man. It was just slamming shut in my face. And I got into law, I start going down this, I guess, this pit, it felt like. And I come home one day and I took off my gear and I sat down in the recliner and I stared at a blank TV screen, and my wife's behind me and she turns the water off and she asked how the day was. And she was very sweet, very kind. Hey, baby, how was your day? And I was a complete jerk, Conrad. I was like, that is the nicest way to put it. And instead of responding with, I had a really hard day and and I don't mean any disrespect to you. I'd rather just not talk about it right now, if that's okay. Let's talk about something different. Let's do something different. Instead, I just responded with one word. And one word can sometimes be like one nail that hammers a lid shut. And I just said, fine. And it was just the way I said it, how it came across. And that led to an argument. It kind of escalated because sometimes it's not really what we say, it's how we say it that escalates a situation. It escalated. So I packed my bags. I went and stayed in a portable office building. And I had been unfaithful to my wife in different ways. Didn't feel guilt, didn't feel remorse, didn't feel anything at the time. I didn't feel anything, period, about anything. And I just completely like a zombie. That's basically how I felt, was like a zombie. And I would drink to numb certain things, and I drink to wake up certain things, and it was just a mess. It's screwed up. It's not healthy. And so I went and I stayed in a portable storage building, had, cot and running water, and I just drank as much as I wanted. And then ultimately got up a few days later on a Sunday morning, put on my uniform, got in my car, went to do my work, and then backed my car into a parking lot of an old abandoned gas station on the south side of town. And that's where I tried to, that's the first time I had ever followed through with the thoughts that I'd had since I was a little boy. And nobody ever knew that I felt, man, I'd be better off dead. Everybody around me would be better off if I wasn't here. Like, they would have more joy. They'd have more peace. Their life would be more fulfilling. Yeah. They'll cry for a little bit, but in a few months they're going to pack up all my crap and move it out, and they'll put it in the attic. And in about a year's time, I won't even be a topic of conversation anymore. It will move on. And that's the reality. People move on. And so I pulled my weapon out, and my sidearm, and I got it up to about right here next to where my ear is. And I stopped. Before I go any further, I stopped drinking after that day, and I started writing. And I developed this little side business that I never marketed. It was just word of mouth. And so I was building websites on the side because I was making like $15.96 or something like that per hour. And my wife homeschooled our children. And so $15.96 an hour for a family of five is pretty hard to get by on, but we were doing it. So I get to that point, and then, I got to the point to where it was like nothing else. It's like, there's no other opportunities. There's nothing coming up. And what happened in the patrol car that day carried over for a while, and it required some changes on my part, some behavior changes, modifications. But I got up on a Sunday morning, put my gear on to go to work, go into my shift. And I didn't hear this audible voice, but I just heard this, like, it's hard to explain how I heard it, but I heard this voice that said, "Today's the day." And I knew exactly what it meant. And I went and turned in my gear. I had written and self-published 2 books at this point. One book at that point. And it had started creating some opportunities. And so I turned in my notice, turned in my gear, and October 1st was the first official day of this mission full time. And so I had a small business, and I was building that, but my primary goal was to use that to fund the mission of reaching the lives of every law enforcement officer and then every first responder with the hope, like with a message of hope. Like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to go down this pit. There's a better way. You don't have to, you don't have to burn down the best part of your life to get the trophies on the job, to get the trophies in your professional life. You can win in all the areas, but it's going to require some adjustments on your part. And so that's why I got out. That's a long story short, but that's why I got out.
What was you came to that really dark spot where you nearly took your own life. What was the catalyst? What was the light that shone on you that showed you the path out of there?
Yeah. I sat in the patrol car with a gun up next to my head, like right here. And I paused. I didn't pull the trigger. I paused, never pulled the trigger. And I yelled at God, like who I saw him as or thought he was. I mean, it's like I grew up in church when my mother remarried. She remarried a preacher, and so we were in church all the time. And so I grew up hearing a lot of religious messages that originated in fear. Like, if you do this, you're going to go to hell. If you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. And I had put some distance between me and the church as a cop, just because when you stop, it was different reasons, but nonetheless, you see a different side of people when you do that, and when you do that work. And so I yelled at God in the patrol car that day, who I saw him as, I thought he was, like waiting to mash, you can tell I'm from the South, but waiting to press this red button to punish me anytime I screwed up. And I said, if you got a plan for my life, if you have a purpose for me, you can have it. Otherwise, I'm out. And I'm sure that there's like this biological or psychological, physiological, whatever explanation for what happened and what I felt. But I had a complete peace sweep over me. Like, it was, if you've ever gone out to the coast and looked at the water first thing in the morning, you've been at the lake first thing in the morning, it's like glass. It went from these like horrible white capping raging waves to just complete peace. And then I felt the best way to describe it was, I felt like this embrace of perfect love, like the most perfect love you could ever fathom embracing you. And I began to weep, like right there. And I thought, if everybody I knew had this, what a game changer it would be. And it was the furthest thing. It was the furthest thing from religion as I had known it, meaning you have to adhere to these standards and these expectations. It was literally the most perfect form of love that I had ever experienced in my life. And I was like, I gotta share this with everybody I can. And so, what took me down that path was me trying to carry all this, like really oversimplifying this, was me trying to carry all the stuff on my own. Like the childhood stuff from when I was a little boy, rape, and then as a teenager, rape and manipulation and deception and spiritual abuse, emotional abuse, all this stuff. And I tried to carry it on my own. I'm strong enough. I can hide this. I mean, I learned to be strong when I was 5 years old. I had to learn to put on a mask when I was a little boy. And I tried to carry it, and everybody's got a breaking point. And I found mine. But I found the strength in letting go. I found the strength in this surrender. And then how do you practically walk this out? Because I don't want to be a religious person. I'm not a religious person in terms of how we see religious people at religion. But I do follow a living God who met me in my patrol car and changed things. And it's more real than what you can touch, see, taste, smell, or feel. And that's kind of like the light that brought me out. Now, it started as a little bitty light, a little flicker of hope. And, and I tell people, look, everybody's got their own belief systems. I mean, there's 8 billion people on the planet, and like 2.6 or something like that, 2.4, 2.6 billion are Christians. And then there's 1.8 billion that are of the Islam faith. And then there's 1.4 or 1.5 billion that are unaffiliated or agnostic or atheist. So people have no belief system, or the third largest religious affiliation in the world, if you classify it like that. And so it doesn't really matter what you believe or don't believe. You got to believe in something bigger than yourself. Because if all you believe in is what you are capable of, if all you believe in is what you can carry, at some point you're going to meet your human potential. And there's only so much you can do with human potential. But when you find that there's something stronger inside, when you start to process and allow this healing to take place inside, there's a new you that's born. There's a new you that comes out of that pain and out of that pit of trauma. And so that's kind of like I firmly believe that I had an encounter with the living God. I'm loyal to him the best I know how. I don't call myself a Christian, although I follow Jesus, because I can't live up to the expectations of others, because I'm a wretch. Like, I'm still, like, I know that I got a long way to go. But I want people, when I speak to them, when I spend time with them, when they read my books, when they hear me speak, when they hear this interview, I want them to encounter that same love, because if you encounter that love, it's a game changer. Like, you don't have to hear the sermon, because the love speaks for itself. Mm-hmm. And love the scripture says love covers a multitude of sin. Mm-hmm. Well, I believe love is the ultimate healing balm for the deepest wound, for the darkest trauma that you carry. Love heals us. And the way my wife loved me through all this stuff, I was a very hard person to love. She would probably disagree, and she would say, no, I was a hard person to love. But the way she loved me reflected this love that I experienced in the car. The grace that she's shown me reflected that. And I think oftentimes we spend too much time trying to preach love. We spend too much time trying to preach grace or mercy or faith instead of demonstrating it to each other. And that's what I needed most in my darkest hour, was someone to be kind to me, someone to love me. And because that's what would pull me out ultimately, was love. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't open to it before then. I often wondered, did I have to get to the place where that was my only option? But I considered that and entertained it for decades. And anyway,
how many people that, you speak to a lot of groups around the country. How many people that you speak to are where you were at that moment?
I'll tell you this. I did 2 events a couple of weeks ago, one on a Friday night near Louisville, Kentucky, and then on one Monday afternoon up near Indianapolis, north of Indianapolis. I have done multiple events this year, and at every single event, there's at least one, but most of the time there's 10, 15, 20 people that'll come up to me and they'll look me in the eyes with their lips trembling, and they'll say, your story is my story too. They'll say, I was in that patrol car too. Or I was a little boy hiding under the bed. And I've had people tell me, you don't have to share all this stuff. Like, we don't like, we're the generation that I come from and the one before me, we don't talk about this stuff. I'm 42. We don't talk about this stuff. We suppress it. We mask it. We figure it out. We handle it. But there's something that happens when you're given permission to address it. When you're given the permission to heal. Like, you don't like this is not a trophy that you have to carry, this scar. Like, yeah, the scar is going to be there, but you don't have to hold on to this stuff to prove how strong you are anymore. And yeah, I don't know how many people have come up to me and said that. The numbers are staggering. And I don't really know how to respond to it. And I'll tell you quite frankly, the only thing that I can muster to say, because it's very emotional. Mm-hmm. And I look at them and say, I'm so grateful that you're here. I'm so glad you're here. And I don't mean just at this event, but you're here and you're shaking my hand or you're hugging my neck. You're in front of me right now. And don't ever take that for granted. And so there's so many. I don't even have a way to know how many it is, but it blows me away at every single event to see how many come up and say that.
Mm-hmm. So you started down this path of writing books, and you've written devotional guides. And in fact, we used one of your devotional guides for first responders as a gift for our VIPs at our
Oh
film
my
premiere.
goodness. Which
And so,
one?
oh man, it had the gray cover. Um,
Was it the prayers and promises for first responders?
I think maybe that's what it was.
Or it wasn't this one, was it?
No, it wasn't that one. It was. It
Oh,
was.
or on spiritual combat?
No, it was. It had first responders in the title.
It was prayers and promises for first responders.
Yeah, I think that's what it was. Yeah, we gave that. We bought a bunch of them and handed them out in our VIP bags, and it was a really amazing thing to
I really
offer
appreciate you
the
doing
people.
that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So, what got you started? Then you said you wanted to share your experience with others, and I'm assuming you wrote that in a book early on. So, what got you now to keep churning out more resources and books for first responders? Hey, it's Conrad here. Just a quick encouragement for you to check out the PTSD 911 documentary if you haven't already. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to take a look at it. You can get it as an individual or your family on Amazon Prime, and you can get it for your agency at ptsd911movie.com/toolkit. I would highly encourage every single first responder department in the country to purchase this film. It's a powerful tool to help you get the conversation started. And I'm not just saying that for myself. I hear that from people around the country, from agencies from California to New York to Florida, everywhere in between. Agencies have been purchasing this film and are using it as a tool to help their first responders talk about mental health, to talk about wellness, to talk about what it takes to be healthy in your mind and in your body. So if you haven't purchased it for your department, please do so. ptsd911movie.com/toolkit. And you can get it for your agency today. You can watch it today. You can share it with your team, and you can use it as a powerful tool to spur the conversation about mental health and wellness. So if you haven't already, purchase the film at ptsd911movie.com/toolkit. Thanks for listening. And now back to the show.
The same reason I still go and speak. And it's the messages I get. I mean, from a business perspective, since May 1st of 2018, when Behind the Badge was released, to today, there have been right at 200,000 book sales.
Wow.
And that's not all 9 of the books, that's 7 of them. And the majority of those are from Behind the Badge. It's reached about 80,000 sales since it was released May 1st of 2018, which is really good, considering how many sworn peace officers are in the country. I write, but I don't sit there and think, man, he sold 200,000 books, he's a millionaire. I don't make a lot on those that sell like that, but it's like if you knew the business behind it, you'd understand it's a labor of love. I do it because I get the messages, I receive the emails, I hear from people, I see the posts, I see the pictures. If I go to an event, and not just one time, but not just 2 times, not 3 times, but after 4 or 5 times, if there's no feedback, if there's no impact, if there's no testimonial that comes out of it, if there's nobody that comes out and says it changed my life or had an impact, I probably wouldn't do it anymore. Even if they don't say it on the spot, it's typically I'll get an email or something a few days later, a message. I do it because I've seen the fruit of it. I keep doing it because I see the fruit. I keep doing it because I've seen the impact. And that's what spurred me on early on, was I did it just because I felt like it was something that I needed to do, deeply convicted to do. And then I started getting messages of how it was having a positive impact on a group or on an individual. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I'm onto something. And then we roll around and Behind the Badge comes out and it starts going crazy. And I'm like, okay, I'm onto something. And so it's really the fact that it's being effective. Now, I don't want to stay somewhere I'm not effective. So if there comes a point where I'm not effective in what I'm doing, whether it's as a communicator in writing or speaking or whatever I'm doing, I don't want to do it anymore. I want to move on because I don't want to just hold a spot or hold a space where someone else could be effective. And so I guess just I keep going. I keep churning them out. Number one, because I love to write. Writing it makes me feel alive. Like singing does, but nobody pays me to sing. And I think they would pay me to stop. But music makes me feel alive. Writing makes me feel alive. And when I get up to share those stories, it's not what happens on a stage that makes me feel alive. Although I do feel electricity running through my veins, it's what happens afterwards. That's really special to me. I don't, if you hear a lot of people talk about the high they get as a communicator, as a speaker, or whatever, it's what happens afterwards. It's the SWAT guy that walks up with a wad of tobacco in his mouth that comes up to me after an event and wants me to sign his books, and I'm signing them. And he's like, man, I enjoyed this today. Thank you so much for coming and for being here. I'm tired of hurting. Thank you for signing my books. Like he just kind of slides it in there in the middle. And so I finished signing the books and I look at him, hand him his books. And I said, are you ready to deal with that today, or you want to keep talking about it? And he said, let's deal with it. And he put his head on my shoulder, my right shoulder, and just made a mess, bawling his eyes out. But today, that man is healthy. He's showing up for his family. He's like got a totally different look on his face and different tone in his voice. The way totally different man. It's the one that said, this man is healed and I'm healing. Y'all can do what you want to do, but I'm going to stay right here until I get what I need. It's the marriages. I mean, I wrote Bulletproof Marriage, released in 2019. It's the thousands of marriages that are together today. Many that had planned their divorce and contacted divorce lawyers, they're together today. And if they're not just together, they've got some sort of work they're doing to mentor other couples. So the impact is not just 200,000 book sales. It's the lives that those lives have impacted. It's the producer at ABC Studios. I'm not going to name his specific title. But after I finished my interview with Good Morning America in Times Square, he come up to me and he looks at me. He's not a first responder, but he has tears running down his face. And he said, man, you spoke to me today. He said, I've been an alcoholic for 57 years. He said, I've stood on top of this building multiple times, and I thought, man, all my pain could be over in just a few seconds. He said, you gave me hope today, man. And then wanted to hug my neck and wanted to get the book from the host and wanted me to sign it to him. But just to say, hey, you gave me hope. You spoke directly to me today. You let me know that that's not an option for me anymore. I mean, who wouldn't want to continue? Because I'm not after a million more. I want to touch one more. I speak tomorrow night up in Ohio. I'm there for one. I'm there for one. And when I'm doing this interview with you right now, when it rolls out, it's here for one, you know? And that's why I continue. I love doing it. I enjoy doing it, but I do it because I keep getting feedback. You know, if nobody bought the books, if nobody tuned into the podcast, if nobody came to the events, if there was no effectiveness, then I probably wouldn't do it anymore. Yeah. But people keep buying books, so I keep writing.
I totally can relate to that just as a filmmaker. You know, it's those after a screening. I remember one time after a screening, this fire chief comes up to me and arms folded, and he was like, man, I didn't think I had a problem until I saw your movie. And today he is leading wellness training for his entire department.
Isn't that awesome? Isn't that awesome?
It's like all the stress and all the work, all the worry, all the work that goes into making a documentary, putting on an event. That's why I do it.
Yeah. Yeah, because now the one life you impacted through your gift is impacting multiple lives.
Yeah.
And, I don't do this for ego.
Yeah.
I do it like I literally try to set all of that aside. If you've ever heard me live at an event, it is it's quite possibly the most uncomfortable thing you'll hear someone ever tell you. But I do it for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we keep hidden keeps power over us.
Mm-hmm.
But what we expose, all that stuff, we hear a lot of people want to expose influencers. They want to expose different people, and it's for a different reason. What if we expose the junk inside of us and laid it on the table, being brutally honest? Yeah, you know what? I have thought about leaving my family. I have thought about ending my life. Mm-hmm. I hate my job. I hate this. Let's start dealing with it. Let's lay it on the table and let's start let's deal with it instead of pretending it doesn't exist anymore and allowing it to get more, power and control over us so we can live in freedom. Mm-hmm. Most of us, we don't live in freedom. We have an illusion of freedom. Mm-hmm. We have all this rage or unforgiveness or bitterness or resentment or whatever, pain, and it comes through in different ways. It shows to other people in different ways, and I don't want to live a life that's just boring. I want to live with passion, but you can't live with passion if you're powerless because of all the junk that's been trying to kill you your whole life. Mm-hmm. And it's time to fight back against it.
What do you say to that first responder who is at that point where they're carrying all this weight, they're carrying all this stuff from the past, all the calls that they've been on, all the junk that happened as a kid? What do you say to them? What's the first step that they can take to experience freedom?
Well, I'll answer it. I think it's more than just one answer, but I'll give you the best. That's probably about an 8-hour answer, but I'll give it to you like this. No, I'm just kidding. Forgive first. And I don't say this from theory. I'm not talking about this from a theory. I had to do this. I carried it for nearly 2 decades without dealing with it and the right way. And look, you can become this hateful, bitter, cynical, cold-hearted person like I was, or you can start saying, I'm not forgiving these people because I'm condoning it, and you don't even have to talk to them or re-engage. Forgive them for your own sake. Now, as hard as it was to forgive people who hurt me, the hardest person I've ever had to forgive was the one looking back at me in the mirror. But you got to do it. Forgiveness, for me, was the first step to finding freedom, to finding healing. And then number 2, which is really tied with number 1, is acknowledge what causes you pain. Now, what causes you pain, or what the pain is often just a symptom, but it's not the root. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a therapist, I'm not a counselor, but I've spent 30-something years trying to figure out my own junk and becoming more aware of my behaviors and my patterns and why I do what I do. And I'll give an example here in just a second. But recognize the pain, acknowledge the pain. And then if you talk to somebody. For the first time in my life, 2021, I think it was 2021. Yeah. Anyway, it was either 2021 or 22. Right now, my brain's screwed up. But for the first time in my life, I talked to a trauma therapist, did something called EMDR. Mm-hmm. There's so many tools out there. If you don't have anybody in the world to talk to about it or ask, call me. Send me an email or call me. I will talk to you. And I will at least try to point you in the right direction. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a doctor, but I am a brother, and I will do my very best to guide you. But forgiveness, I'm going to tell you straight up, you're going to buck it. You're going to be like, no, I'll never forgive them. I know how you feel. Been there. But forgiveness is step number one. And then acknowledging the pain that remains. And then having a strategy, having a support system around you of people that you could trust with everything you've got. And don't take all this junk out on people that you love and that you care about. This is hard, but again, from experience, not theory, it's not your spouse's job to walk on eggshells around you, and it's not their job to heal you. Their only responsibility is to love you through it. But their ability to love you is going to either be made more difficult or more easy by how you show up. And so own it, and then deal with it. And here's how I say it. I follow Jesus, and I believe that Jesus redeemed me, meaning that he paid a price for my junk and for me. And so if I own it, I sold it to him because he bought it from me. He redeemed it, and he redeemed me, and it's his now. He deals with it. He handles it. And so I've got my own faith walk. So if you wanted to have a conversation from that perspective, then it's a deeper discussion that I love to go into. But I don't want to preach to people, but everything I do is based on a biblical foundation, even though it may not sound like it. So forgive first, acknowledge the pain, and deal with it, and then recognize how you're showing up. Like, pause for a second every once in a while and just recognize how you're showing up and see why you're doing the things that you're doing. Here's what I mean by that. About a year ago, I had a friend come up to me. I have a nonprofit, and my friend came up to me and said, "Hey, just handed me a check, $5,000. This dude has been one of my best friends since like middle school, elementary, whatever. And I love this dude, man. He's not a cop, not a first responder. He's a business owner. And I noticed that after he did that for me, and I was so grateful, like blew my mind. Never had anybody do something like that for me. I started like distancing myself. And I'm like, why am I doing this? And I go back to when I'm a little boy. And the first time that the guy next door lured me, because he was a babysitter. I was left with him as a babysitter. But the very first time I ever had an encounter with him, he was holding a cookie, a chocolate chip cookie, at the backside of the barn, and he pointed at me and was like, "Hey, come here. You want this cookie? Come here." And he grabbed me and kissed me on the lips. And then all that other crap started taking place, and it was like, "I'll kill you if you talk about it." Just fear, guilt, and shame are powerful, powerful forces. The most powerful force is love. The most powerful force in the whole world is love. It overcomes all that. And so I started thinking back, and I'm like, well, why would my buddy give me $5,000? And I start distancing myself, because subconsciously there's a connection between anybody that they appear that they want to help me. It's tied to some desire to hurt me, harm me, manipulate me, or do something that causes me pain in some way. And so I had to deal with that. And so, yeah, being cautious is one thing, but being cynical, meaning that we question everyone's motives around us, gets us to a place where like you can't even see the possibility for miracles in your life. And miracles, I don't mean like, crazy stuff. I mean like the beauty of healthy, authentic relationships, seeing the beauty of love demonstrated in your life. Like you got up this morning, that's a miracle. You woke up today. Your heart's beating, you got breath in your lungs, and it keeps us from seeing the potential of authentic relationships with people, because what a few did.
Mm-hmm.
And so understanding why you do what you do, why, like, and we don't have time for this, but why was I unfaithful to my wife? Yeah, I was a piece of crap. We could just say that. I was a turd. But why? Like, was it because I got to the point to where I no longer got a rush from the calls on the job? Was it that I was bored? I mean, we could dissect it all day. I was a selfish piece of crap, and I took nobody else's feelings or like I didn't consider them at all. It was just about me, about Adam, and I try to break that down into a little bit more understanding in different situations or in different settings. But yeah, I think understanding why we do what we do and our behavior patterns are really, really important. Like, why do we shut down around certain people? Like, our antennas go up, right? Anyway, so
I want to ask you this. You write a lot of books. So books, I've been thinking about this lately. What we input into our brain affects our life. It affects the trajectory of our life. If I input garbage, and I posted this yesterday or 2 days ago on TikTok. I said, recently I've been watching this one comedian that kind of showed up on my feed, and when you see a comedian or see any kind of video and you watch any piece of it, you see more and more of it, right? This is how the algorithm works. Well, this guy is very funny, but he's very dark, and some of his comedy is goes against my faith, goes against my way of how I want to live. And I found myself being sucked into that. And I found myself begin to thinking thoughts that were in alignment with what this guy was bringing. And so I had to cut that off. So, how do you see your books as a tool to help transform the minds of those people who are reading?
One of the things I realized early on, one of the tools, it's just a tool, but one of the tools I started using shortly after my experience in the patrol car was something called emotional freedom technique, EFT, or tapping, which uses the methods of ancient Chinese acupressure and psychology. And so understanding how to address the subconscious mind, which is the motor beneath the surface causing my eyes to blink, my lungs to function. I can go and tie my shoes. I don't have to think about it. Like, just so many different things that we do, we don't think about. Well, there's a set of beliefs that are in that subconscious mind that if we're not aware of them, if we're not consciously aware of those patterns or those belief systems, then like they continue to run us. And so think about it like this. If you have just use an example, a GMC 2500 or F250, whatever, pick your brand, but it's a diesel, it's a heavy duty truck, but you've got a 4-cylinder engine running that thing. It's probably not going to do what you think it's going to do, like what it was created to do, right? That truck was created to pull heavy weight. It was created to go long distances. It was created to pull heavy weight, but it can't because it's got a 4-cylinder engine in it instead of the Duramax, instead of that big diesel engine, or instead of the Cummins diesel engine, whatever. And so understanding that you have to sometimes go in there and say, why does fear continue to run my life? And it's crazy. As a law enforcement officer, I do things that, like most every officer does, most every first responder does, that 99.9% of the rest of the population would never even consider doing. It would make them piss their pants to think about doing. I would do that, but when it came to like laying in my bed to go to sleep at night, fear would paralyze me. It would paralyze me in here, or making decisions, or being committed, or forgiving, or what. Fear would stop me. So understanding how the subconscious mind works, and I'm not an expert on it, but I've spent nearly 10 years working on mine and understanding fear and shame and doubt and unbelief and all these different things and how they kind of run the motor and they run the vehicle. And so what I wanted to do was I began a journey over a decade ago to deal with mind, body, spirit. I said I wanted to focus on improving mind, body, and spirit, do something every day to improve mind, body, spirit. And I said, if I could read something that in less than 2 minutes would set the trajectory of my thought process for the day, or kind of give me that baseline for the day, then yeah, it may do like good input. Mm-hmm. And so when I wrote Behind the Badge, I wrote something that would give them a story, a very brief story, and then a very brief teaching, and then a prayer that kind of could become the baseline for the day, and a scripture to ponder or meditate on. And in everything I've written, that's been the direction, is to take them to a place where hope replaces fear, where love replaces hate, where faith replaces doubt, or whatever in their subconscious mind. So they practice it long enough, that becomes the new engine that runs them. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of faith, in terms of being like being a Christian or follower of Jesus or going to church, what I've learned is that you could go to church on Sunday morning and you could live like a rotten core out, like just rotten the rest of the week. And then you could show back up on Sunday. No change whatsoever. You're going to feel good for a little bit. It'll feel good. And when I say rotten, like Sunday night, Monday's coming. Like if you haven't got that stuff. And so there's a actual reprogramming of the neural pathways of our brain that happens when we read or we put in different information. Like if you go and you run every single day, it's going to change some things. If you cycle every day like you do, it's going to change some things. If you read every day, if you read the Bible every day or whatever you read, if you read it every day, there's something that's going to begin to take place. If you read it and meditate on it, think on it. And so you have to be intentional about your awareness of how you're thinking. You can't challenge every thought. You can't monitor every thought. There's studies that say 40 to like 70,000 thoughts a day. I don't know how many that is, but if you can only be aware of the thoughts you're having, then the rest of those thoughts are happening subconsciously. Mm-hmm. And you're not even aware you're having them, like unless you get to that place. And so awareness is so important. And I wanted to bring people to a place where you're at least aware of what your stuff is that's kind of causing you the issues, and then start reprogramming through planting seeds in the subconscious mind of, I can overcome this. I can do this. That's why you hear me talk about Live Unconquered so much. Mm-hmm. And when I sign the books, I sign either Live Full or Love Well. Like, what's that one little seed that I could plant? Mm-hmm. That would last generations in somebody's family. They don't even have to mention my name or remember my book. But if they can go out and it affects their family, it affects their marriage, affects their children, affects generations, then I think that is probably like one of the coolest things I could ever do. Mm-hmm. Is a family stayed together because I wrote a little book called Bulletproof Marriage, or there's a cop doing his or her job today, and they're still doing it, and they've got a better outlook and disposition because they were reading Behind the Badge. Mm-hmm. And all of this, my little secret, give it away here, my little secret is all of this is I try to model the way Jesus did things. Mm-hmm. You're never going to hear me come out and look at you and me tell you, you need to change this, or you need to change this, or you need to stop this. Look, we're all adults, man. Mm-hmm. We know right from wrong. And deep down, we know sin, we know good versus evil, mm-hmm. and we know what we need to do. We know that we have to make our own behavior changes. So that's kind of like, yeah, I hope that it makes those impacts and it kind of affects their thinking. But mm-hmm. I don't want to just stop at like positive thinking or positive affirmations. Mm-hmm. I want them to actually take that next step to start changing behavior patterns and taking the step to change their lifestyle, like lifestyle changes, so that they can see outcome changes, circumstantial changes, mm-hmm. because what we think about, what we believe affects what we think about, how we think about the things that we're dealing with, how we see the challenges that we're facing. And so what we believe and what we think about affects what we speak, and what we speak eventually determines how we act. Mm-hmm. And over time, those will determine the circumstances around us. Mm-hmm. And so if you live in fear and lack and scarcity, then you're going to see it all around you. You're going to experience it. That is going to be your harvest field. Mm-hmm. But if you begin to see that love has created a way for you to walk in absolute abundance, and I don't mean necessarily material abundance, mm-hmm. although that is possible in reality, but but it's abundance in peace, abundance in harmony in your home, abundance in unity in your relationships, and abundance in fulfillment, and being able to live in a place of freedom to where you're not held down by the pain of your past and all the junk that tried to destroy you. And so, yeah, I hope that some way, somehow, that it affects people's outlook and changes that stinking thinking.
Wow, Romans 12 talks about being transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yes.
And it's interesting that now, scientists have proven that to be true.
Yes.
How we change or how we are transformed is by renewing the mind and renewing those neural pathways. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting
but you have to read it.
Right.
You have to read it.
You got to put input in. Yeah.
You got to read it. And it's not just reading it to check the box. Like, well, I've read the Bible front to back, cover to cover 57 times in my life. That's awesome. But if you're not reading the Bible and allowing it to transform you, or like the greatest miracle for me, aside from salvation and redemption, the greatest miracle is a shift in perspective. And when you read God's word, if you've never read the Bible, I would suggest that you start today with reading a chapter of Proverbs every day for a month. Yep. And then alongside of that, reading a Psalm. And just start there. Just begin there and start seeing the wisdom and the truth. And you're going to see you're not alone in a lot of the things you feel. And so, allow it to start changing you and take a verse and meditate on it. Like, think about it. One of the things I do whenever I'm writing is I will look for key words, and then I'll study it in context, meaning I study the verses before, after it, who was speaking, who were they speaking to, where were they speaking at, what were the circumstances around where they're speaking, and then what's the true meaning of that word. For example, and it's not a Bible lesson, but this blew my mind. In December, I had the pleasure of spending the day with a Hebrew scholar, 79 years old, and man is still like, he's on the road 300 days a year, crazy.
Wow.
And he sat down and we spent about 6 or 8 hours together. And he said, he taught me Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, there's a verse. I can't remember which one it is. Forgive me. But this verse, it says, let us, capital U, make mankind in our, capital O, image, or some translations say likeness. Well, the Hebrew root word or Aramaic is Tsekel, Tsekl, which means shadow. So first of all, who was he talking to? Second of all, there's a capital U and a capital O there. Let us make mankind in our image. So he's declaring the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, before it's ever explained or expressed. And let us make mankind in our shadow. So if my body casts a dark shadow, and the scripture tells us that Adam and Eve were like pure light before the fall, they would have essentially looked like light bulbs walking around. If you read the scripture and see how it describes them, it kind of describes how they were. So they casted shadows of light and not shadows of darkness. So this all comes from that one word or of likeness or image, and understanding the depths. And then as you go through scripture, and it's not written in chronological order, Genesis to Revelation, when you go through scripture and you begin to see how this in Genesis 1 is mentioned over throughout the scripture. When Jesus in the New Testament speaks about, you have a light, don't hide it. It will not be hidden. You become salt and light. So the only way to see the more of his light in our humanity is to die daily to our own desires. And so it comes to dying to self in our own desires, our own, even, hey, I'm not going to carry this stuff by myself anymore, because Jesus said, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. My yoke is easy, my burden's light. And so we could start talking about the yoke. We could start talking about the burden. We could start talking about what that looked like in their time and the mind-blowing truth about that now. But if I'm made in his image, in his shadow, I'm his shadow, then that means that the only darkness that I carry is from my humanity, my sin. And then the only way to nurture that little light that I started with is to die to self and allow him to increase. So I decrease so he can increase. And I decrease by saying, yes, I would like to rip this person limb from limb for what they did for me. I would like to cause great harm to them, but instead I'm going to say, I forgive you. And I'm going to let God deal with it. I'm going to literally pause and intentionally release this. I'm going to let it go so I can have peace. Because if they hurt me one time or 5 times or 10 times, 25 years ago, 37 years ago, whatever, it no longer has to continue to have control and power over me and ruin the moments and memories I can build today. And so if I'm made in his likeness, if I'm made in his shadow, then I should probably start acting like it and recognize the power that I have to be more than a conqueror in a world that is dark. And here's my perspective of it. I believe that when we were given life, that we were put here for a reason. Mm-hmm. Quite simply, as followers of Jesus, we're put here to be ambassadors for him. Mm-hmm. Matthew 6:33 says, seek first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and then all these things will be added to you. Well, that's another topic for another day, but it's talking essentially about material needs, food, water, clothing. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to be an ambassador of heaven, I probably should know their laws. If I were to go be an ambassador for the United States in a foreign land, I need to learn their laws. I need to know the U.S. laws. I need to know culture, and I need to be the one that kind of acts as the go-between. And I'm going to represent my land very well in this foreign land. And so we are ambassadors for his kingdom in a foreign land. In the foreign land, we are enemies. Mm-hmm. And Jesus said, if they hate you, remember, they hated me first. He was the first one to roll this thing. And if they hate you, they're going to hate me. So understand that them hating us is part of it. Mm-hmm. For them to oppose us is part of it. But understanding that we have been given the most powerful force of all, and that is true, holy love. And the greatest commandment of all is how we love him in the process of loving others. And I think that we would be more beneficial in how we carry that out than talking about how much we love him. I know he wants us to love him, but I believe it brings him greater joy and greater pleasure than how we can love each other. Mm-hmm. That brings a blessing and honor to God, more than us patting ourselves on the back or patting ourselves on the chest and saying, look how much I love God. Mm-hmm. Well, how do you love your fellow human? How do you love your family? How do you love your brother, your sister? How do you love your enemy? Mm-hmm. Those that hate you. Mm-hmm. And so when we can begin to walk that out and experience it and see the change then that love creates, that's my message is love. Like if you could have, when my time comes and they lower me into the ground, I know my life has been a mess, but I want people to say, Adam Davis made me feel some kind of love, man. He introduced me to some kind of love that I never experienced before. He introduced me to this peace that changes everything. And when you have that peace, and I learned, like I developed it, and it's something that you have to sort of cultivate and nurture. It's like a garden inside of you. And that garden can be full of nasty weeds and poison ivy and toxic junk, or it can become this beautiful place that produces wonderful fruit. But how we nurture that, how we cultivate that, take some time this week to identify the weeds that are inside there. Because if you're made in his image, you're not a weed bed, you're a garden. And start nurturing that stuff inside and see what he does for it.
Wow. Man, been to church today.
You brought it up, bro. I wasn't going to bring it up.
This has been great. So tell us as we wrap up here, how can people get in touch with you? How can they find your books? Where can they connect with you?
So I love to hear from people that listen to these podcasts, Conrad. And if you wanted to, if you had the time, if you listened to this and got something out of it, I'd love it if you just email me, adam@theadamdavis.com, adam@adamdavis.com. Or you can go to my website, theadamdavis.com. literally Google Adam Davis Behind the Badge or Adam Davis Unconquered, and most of my stuff will pop up. But I love to hear from your listeners. I love to hear when I get to do these kind of interviews. I love to connect with y'all, one-on-one. But you're welcome. Go to check out the books on Amazon. If you've read any of the books, I'd love to hear from you. If you've heard me speak somewhere, I'd love to hear from you. As much as I've thought in the past, man, it's time to do something different. Like this is heavy sometimes.
Sure.
I can't walk away from it because love pushes me forward. Love pulls me. And I want to see you, if you're watching this or you're listening to this, in John 10:10, Jesus said, the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life more abundantly or to the fullest. And I want to see you have a smile on your face again. I want to see you laugh in the midst of chaos and storms and adversity again. I want to see you have peace again. I want to hear from you and say, my marriage is thriving and it is fulfilling and it's my dream marriage. I want to hear that there's harmony in your home and harmony inside of you. That's like, yeah, I need people to buy the books, but if you don't buy the books, find this peace and find this love. That's the most important thing ever, man. It changes everything.
Well, Adam, we'll leave it at that.
Thank you for having
so
me,
much.
Conrad.
Yeah. It's been a pleasure having you on the program and just an honor to know you and to have a conversation with you. Thank you for your willingness to make a difference in the lives of first responders.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks, Adam, for joining me today on the podcast. I look forward to your next book, and I look forward to working with you at some time in the future at upcoming events. And thank you for listening or for watching. And just a reminder that I'm here every Wednesday with a brand new podcast episode, so be sure to tune in next week. And please remember, you are not alone. If you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.